Mueller made it very clear all the time that he didn't want to testify and he was going to be a reluctant witness. What honestly did the Democrats think he was going to do?
Well, I think that even if he kind of gave voice to the conclusions of the report, it would educate a lot of people who really hadn't read the report. Of course, perhaps you and I have read the report. I've read multiple sections multiple times, but it's kind of like...
Kind of puts you to sleep at night? Is that how it goes?
Well, let me put it this way. I think a lot more people watched Godfather the movie than read the book.
Possibly. So do you feel that it accomplished something?
I did. I think that, especially in the Intelligence Committee hearing, which I thought went really well, I thought that Bob Mueller was actually strong in his answers. He was direct. It kind of pointed out some of the to-dos that we have as a committee and as a Congress going forward. In my own line of questioning, which was about counterintelligence risks raised by even President Trump's linkages to Russia, it's clear that unfortunately Bob Mueller did not actually analyze those risks, but those risks exist. The most notable being President Trump's linkages created by his trying to build Trump Tower Moscow, and then his false statements about it. Unfortunately, because of those false statements, he might even be subject to compromise by the Russians, something that we have to further analyze and investigate.
But so there you were, and you were asking him about all of this, and I didn't count exactly how many times, but often he would say, I'm not going to go there, I'm not going to discuss that, I'm not going to go there. So was there some sort of deal that the Democrats understood that that would be his answer much of the time, and they didn't push back? They didn't say, why not?
Well, in some cases, even when he said that, we still asked him further questions. But at the end of the day, we knew from the start that he was going to try to stay within the confines of the report. That being said, it was worth probing for more. In one particular instance, in my line of questioning, he actually went further than what was in the report. He actually said that there's an ongoing counterintelligence investigation with regard to Michael Flynn, and he said it's currently happening, and here we were thinking that all the investigations were over. So that was beyond the scope of the report, and that's what made news.
But it just made like a little bit of news because it was just a little bit of an addition, right? For the most part, he did not express himself beyond the four corners, and at the end of the day was allowed to not be pressed very hard.
I think for the most part, yes. But as I said before, I think that even talking about what was in the report was worthwhile because, quite frankly, most people don't know what's in that report.
What did you think of people who said that the unfortunate part was that Congress didn't lead with Russia, but rather Russia was left to the afternoon in the Intelligence Committee as opposed to the earlier morning session?
That might be a valid point. It was a little bit above my pay grade in terms of negotiating the terms of his appearance. I think it might have made sense to go with Volume 1 first, which is what we covered.
Do you support impeachment?
In this report, it's clear that it describes impeachable behavior. The offenses are impeachable. What I've said is if we're going to start something, we better finish it, meaning we need to be able to sustain a conviction. So I'm a foot soldier right now in the investigations, trying to expose as much wrongdoing as possible, A, to protect our country, but B, also to hold them accountable. And if that helps to sway opinion and we can get started on such a proceeding, that's fine. In any case, for 2020, all this has to be out there for purposes of the vote.
Right now, when it comes down to, and it's mostly the Democrats in Congress, you haven't really joined the yes column, right? Are you in the sort of wait and see column?
I'm in the let's investigate and gather as much evidence as possible to get to a conviction, if we're going to go that route column. I just don't think that we should start and then have a situation where he's cleared of wrongdoing and he can really say he's exonerated, in which case I think it would A, embolden him, and B, I think it would almost reassure his reelection, which would be the worst outcome of all outcomes.
Is Nancy Pelosi, in your judgment, an effective leader?
I actually think that she has almost become the center of our caucus, and in becoming the center, she's kind of become an effective leader. And the reason I say that is you can just point to what happened last week. Even at the same time that we were having Bob Mueller come before us and had 5 or 6 hours of questions regarding the president, she was ironing out a deal with the president on a budget deal which takes a threat of a debt ceiling mishap or collapse off the table for 2 years and increases investments in domestic priorities. So I think she's able to kind of walk and chew gum, and I think that's what we have to do to show that we're good stewards of government.
At the same time, and I know you read the New York Times, the Washington Post, Pelosi and her operation have cranked out any number of bills that you passed in the House that are dead in the Senate. So at the end of the day, good job, it won't happen. How does that go? How does that feel like a success for the Democrats?
Well, I think that you sometimes have to lay down a marker. Just as an example, the Equality Act, right? Nobody anticipated we'd ever pass the Equality Act through the U.S. House of Representatives, let alone Congress, and yet it happened. Now, will it go anywhere in the Senate? We don't know. But
what do you think?
I don't think it's going to necessarily happen in this session, but on the other hand, I didn't see, gay marriage becoming conventional, mainstream, legal practice as quickly as it did. So that's one.
Previous administration.
Yeah. I think that the other thing that I would say is we also helped to set the agenda for the presidential discussion. I think passing these bills is important. Obviously, we have to put pressure on the Senate, though, as you mentioned.
So the Trump administration has attacked the president himself, Baltimore, for freshman women in Congress. Are these just distractions, or is this something that each time necessitates a response?
I think overall it's a distraction on his part. He's trying to distract us from him being unable, unwilling, and he's just not going to deliver on pocketbook priorities such as rebuilding America's infrastructure or lowering prescription drug costs. That being said, what he does in making these attacks is kind of remind us all of what the stakes are in 2020. I'm a racial, religious, and ethnic minority, and I'm an immigrant. When he brings up these attacks, such as the one about go back to your own country, it rehashes really very difficult memories for people like me and others who've confronted this in our lives. But it also reaffirms something to me, which is I have to tell everyone, including the 30% of those in my district who are born outside this country, that they are Americans. They might not all be Republicans, Democrats, or Independents, but they're all Americans, and they're upset.
And yet what he says resonates with people who ask the question, when is an order of deportation not an order of deportation, and isn't the law the law? And so there is also that feeling, is there not, and legitimately so, among some Americans?
I definitely think that we want to have a legal immigration system, and to the extent that he was just merely making the point that we wanted a legal immigration system, I think people would be with him. I think when he racializes it, that's when he crosses a line. He started out by banning Muslims, then he called Mexican migrants rapists and criminals, and then he separated parents from children at the border as a deterrence policy toward migration. That's unacceptable. That's un-American.
One last question. Giant field of Democratic presidential candidates. Who are your top three?
I'm staying out of it right now. I've got
come on,
seven.
This is part of your pay
I've got
grade, though.
7 former or present colleagues who are in the race. I suggested to Tom Perez that we should just have brackets like the NCAA's and have people kind of debate against each other in the north, south, east, and west. But honestly, though, I think that we have to avoid getting too distracted by what the president does, and we have to each present an inclusive vision of how all Americans could see themselves in an America run by a Democratic president.
So in other words, Carol, I'm not going to answer that question. Is that right?